Okay, thank you for joining us today for the first webinar in a three-part series exploring different ways humanities centers can advocate for the humanities. I'm Bea Gurwitz, the Deputy Director of the National Humanities Alliance, and I'm thankful to my colleagues at the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes for their collaboration in conceiving and facilitating this series. Aaron and Guillaume are here with us today. Thank you so much. Today's session will be focused on opportunities to advocate for federal funding for the humanities and to engage with federal policymakers more generally to help them better understand and see the value of the humanities. With this goal in mind, we will discuss various ways to connect with campus-based government relations officers, ways to connect with members of Congress and their staff in district, and ways to advocate on Capitol Hill. Our next session in the series will be on February 28th, and it will focus on how humanities centers can help engage undergraduate students in the humanities to help reverse declining enrollments in courses and majors. And then our final gathering will happen later this spring to discuss advocating for centers and for the humanities more broadly to administrators. For today, I am joined by two Humanities Center directors, Susan Derwin, who is the director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center at UC Santa Barbara, and Kimberly Marshall, who is the faculty director of the Oklahoma University Arts and Humanities Forum. Both Susan and Kim have participated in Humanities Advocacy Day in the past and have been involved in district efforts to engage with members of Congress. I'm also joined by two university government relations officers, Leanne Hotek, who is the director of federal relations at the University of Iowa, and Aaron McClendon, who is the Assistant Director of the Office of Government Affairs at Princeton. University government relations officers are key partners in our efforts at the National Humanities Alliance to advocate on Capitol Hill, and they're also partners of campus-based humanities centers, faculty, and administrators who want to tell the story of the humanities on Capitol Hill. How humanities centers can work most effectively with government relations officers will actually be our first topic today. And with that, I'm going to kick things to our panelists. And first, to Leanne. Leanne, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do, and maybe just start with a brief primer on what it means to be a government relations officer?
Yeah, sure, Bea. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be with you all today. As Bea mentioned, I'm the executive director of federal relations for the University of Iowa, meaning I do all of our interactions, advocacy, lobbying on the federal side for the university. So taking kind of, I think, a big step back, almost all of our universities that receive federal research money have some type of person who's responsible for interacting with various federal, state, local agencies. I'll say, for the University of Iowa, that means I have federal, and then I have a counterpart who does state relations. So I work with the agencies and Congress out here, and I'm actually based in DC, and Aaron and I are actually on the same floor. So we're calling in from the same floor. He's just down the hall in the same building. There's a lot of us here who do the federal work in the same building. So, we are responsible for the broad swath of interactions relating to advocacy. So anything from federal financial aid, humanities funding, NIH funding. My office handles all of that advocacy on behalf of the university. So I really see our role as a conduit, kind of a dual path, both as the eyes and ears on the ground for campus out here, relaying important information, as it relates to budget appropriations, authorization issues, and then also as the advocate and lobbyist for campus in reverse, to Congress when we have priorities out here. So that's kind of big picture for what I do. And again, my role is just on the federal side. A lot of us institutions have folks who do the local and state side as well.
Thank you, Leanne. I'm going to kick it to Aaron. Can you explain your portfolio and let us know if there's anything else big picture about government relations officers that you'd want to share?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Aaron McClendon, Princeton University. So my portfolio, for first and foremost, actually does include humanities research and advocacy. It's actually my favorite area of advocacy too. But we also do support for research when it comes to federal funding for research for energy, fusion energy, for example, federal student aid, etc. And so like that is our primary. We touch a broad variety of like research areas and topics that are important to universities and higher education, generally speaking. And Leanne did a great job like summarizing like the role of a government relations official for universities. And I think to add like I see us as very important roles in like delivering information to our partners in Congress, making sure that they have information about the important issues like funding for the humanities, specifically supporting three major initiatives, like educating those who are not familiar about the importance of certain topics, like the importance of the humanities, helping clear up misconceptions about humanities funding or for areas that may be clouding judgment and may prevent them from understanding the importance and the value of federal investment, and also providing information to our members and advocates who are strong supporters of our priorities and giving them the tools to have conversations with their colleagues and like really justify increases or our priorities in Congress. So those are our main priorities, I think, as government relations officials in empowering our member partners in Congress to have those conversations.
Thanks, Aaron. That was a great overview. I'm going to kick it to Susan and then Kim to just introduce your centers very quickly to contextualize the work you're doing for everybody here. Susan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Bea. It's great to be here to speak about this work. So our work at the center encompasses primarily three areas. We mount public programs, including a year-long thematically focused series. We train PhD students to do community-engaged humanities work, and we run collaborative programs with a variety of partners, such as nonprofits, state prisons, and elementary schools. And finally, we manage university and extramural research funding, including the federal grants of humanities and arts faculty.
Thanks, Kim.
So I'm Kim Marshall, and as Bea said, I'm the faculty director of the OU Arts and Humanities. That's the University of Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Forum. We have a fairly young humanities center here, and we've only been around for about 6 years. And I stepped in as the second director after the initial director had launched the center, but we're still growing in a state context where humanities are not often the priority at the local, state, or federal level. So it's I think a unique context, but one with a lot of opportunity for growth.
Thanks. Okay, so to flesh out this relationship a little bit more about how Leanne and Aaron do their work and how they interface with humanities centers and faculty on campus, I'm hoping you can drill in a little bit more. Leanne, what does your relationship with humanities folks on campus look like? Who do you interact with? What do you talk to them about? How does this all work? Leanne and then Aaron.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that I tried to do when I started this role, which I've been doing this about 6.5 years now, and I was lucky that Teresa, who runs our Oberman Center for Humanities at the university, has been doing her work for a long time too, which therefore then made my job a little bit easier. But one of my first visits to campus, like I said, I'm here in DC. So I sat down, met with her, I toured the center, I met the faculty working over there, a couple of our grad students, and then that kind of set the trajectory for our working relationship over the past number of years now. So I do regular touch bases with our center, both when I am back on campus and as things arise. So I kind of try to just keep an open communication stream flowing with them. And then one of the other things which is important, I think we're going to touch on in a little bit, is what do they care about? What issues are they having? Where are their funding priorities? What NEH grants are we receiving? What state grants are we receiving? And kind of trying to stay on top of all of that. So one of the ways in which I do that, one is open line of communication, and then two, proactively reaching out to make sure that I'm meeting with the folks, the new researchers, our new PhD students, to learn about what projects they are working on and if any of those are federally funded, and then how I can be a resource to them moving forward as well.
Aaron?
So at Princeton, we have a humanities council, which is a combination of at least like 16 different humanities departments that we are working with now to identify advocates, areas of like excitement and interest for humanities in general. And we really focus a lot on like projects funded by the NEH and projects that could be great for telling a story about the importance of the humanities for our partners in Congress. And so like with the center, I always like to ask questions like what areas of the humanities are up and coming and exciting and like really grab the attention of like the public. What projects are helping to build community and like help build like build establishment and build relationships that we can talk about when we're meeting with our friends in Congress. And we also like love to focus on the projects that will empower the humanities scholars to like change the field of humanities itself, like incorporating more 21st century technology in humanities research, maybe incorporating ethics in the creation of future socially responsible technologies, and also empowering how do we empower scholars to tell their own stories and like really be proactive about like engaging members of Congress and talking about the importance of the NEH and other funding sources for the humanities. I also like to work with my task force within the Association of American Universities. I'm the chair of the Humanities Task Force, and we love to find new ways to tell stories and angles about like what new aspects of humanities can we tell? What can we use to demonstrate the value of the humanities to our culture, to our society, and to the preservation of our history? And so the key challenge right now is like still maintaining that relationship, going to campus more often now that we have pandemic restrictions that are being lifted. We can actually go to the events on campus and really see like firsthand, like this is the impact, this is the community benefit of our programming.
Thank you. So I think I need to say that Leanne and Aaron are leaders in the field of humanities advocacy when it comes to government relations officers. They are extremely involved, they're extremely connected to folks on campus, and they're invested in the cause. I'm going to turn it to Susan and Kim to sort of talk a little bit about what kinds of engagements they've had with their GR officers in the past, which can vary widely. Kim, why don't you take it first?
Sure. So I think I'm in this panel also in case some of our audience is thinking like, wow, that's an amazing amount of services that a GR person can do. Oklahoma has nothing of the sort. And it's sort of a DIY kind of situation. Our GR office in Oklahoma at OU has the only contact I've had with them is when the provost went, you should check and make sure that they know what you're up to. So our office is and I hear it varies, but in Oklahoma, our GR person is very interested in just making sure that advocacy doesn't cross any lines or get us in trouble or set any trip ups for people down the road. But also in my context, and I think it's not unique to Oklahoma. Is that the GR office also tends to be much more focused on the state legislature than they do on what's happening at the federal level, because it's from the state legislature that we're getting immediate consequences in terms of legislation, limiting what we can teach, and in terms of the funding streams to the state institutions. And so they seem much more concerned about what's happening when communication is happening at the state level. But that's been my experience, which is very different than having someone out there like laying the pathway.
Susan?
Yes, here at UC Santa Barbara, no one has ever even been looking over my shoulder. I haven't had much contact with the GR offices on our campus. I learned that UC Santa Barbara has the smallest government relations team of all the UCs. There are 2 people. And my sense in doing my research is that most of this activity or their activity occurs outside of the humanities. I know, for example, that the Department of Defense actively funds basic research in biological engineering and sciences, and that the GR officers are working with campus faculty and higher administration involved in this research. My sense is that the team of 2 works receptively, unlike Leanne and Erin, which is to say that they're there to step in and support the campus on its various interests and interactions with government officials when they're asked to, but that they're really not seeking, at least at this point, to catalyze new relationships for us. The government relations assistant director I spoke with didn't know about Humanities Advocacy Day, but she was very happy to learn about it. She encouraged me to contact her whenever I hold events or run programs that might be of interest to elected officials, so she could then contact their offices and invite them or the representatives to attend. So I'll do that. And, you know, really, I'm hoping, though, that by cultivating a relationship with them, we'll be tilling the soil so that should opportunities come up, for example, to earmark certain things, we'll be able to move on it, not have to start a relationship anew and then say, okay, let's do something.
I appreciate the optimistic tone. I think that's a terrific idea. And I also imagine that Leanne and Erin have other tips for folks who find themselves on campuses where government relations folks are more focused on the state level or are, you know, consumed with the other bigger dollar funding that's coming in from other directions. What would you suggest to humanities centers or other humanities folks on campus if they don't yet have a relationship? What do you do?
Yeah, so my first suggestion would be find out who the person is. I think that's the best first step. As I mentioned a bit in the beginning, and you know, I think as Susan just mentioned, the offices can range from our really big institutions have teams of 3. I think the biggest one I know has maybe 5 people out here doing just federal, and those are your massive research institutions. And then smaller institutions maybe have 1 person who's doing alumni relations, comms, state, local, and federal. You know, for context, I fall in the middle. We have a 2-person team. I do just federal. And so, you know, so that's a big range is what I'm trying to say on issues that these folks are in charge of working on. So I would say kind of identify who that person is and do exactly what Susan did, which is reach out, let them know who you are and what you're doing. And then again, we're going to dive into this in a minute, talking specifically about Humanities Advocacy Day out here in DC, but also how you can work with state folks too. And I know that's been an issue on a lot of our states of some interesting ideas being proposed out there. And so making sure that you're connecting with the folks who are having those conversations daily would be helpful. I'll turn it over to Aaron too. I'm sure he has other thoughts.
Yes, Luann absolutely nailed it. I would also definitely push for like arranging a meeting with like your federal relations staff or government relations staff. I personally love it when people from campus, whether it's humanities or any other area, like raise an area for me to think about, like, and say like, okay, here's something that we are concerned with. What areas of advocacy, what can we do? Like, what can we think about? It helps me think about how to do my job better. Helps me know like what legislation I should be looking out for, what things I could be monitoring. And also helps me build that relationship with the scholar or professor who's interested in the first place. And so like when things like Advocacy Day, National Humanities Advocacy Day come up, I can join into like a broader like advocacy coalition and like really find support for getting like that advocacy done and really learning more about an issue and like learning about issues and actually focusing on advocating for those issues is my favorite part of the job. So I always look forward to when campus leaders or campus scholars reach out.
Yeah. I'll also say that I've heard from another colleague who's a federal relations person at BU, that she just likes to be on everybody's lists, you know, likes to be on the Humanities Center list, likes to be on Title VI list, so that she has information incoming always about the dynamic things that are happening on campus, because you never know when you're going to be in a meeting with a congressional staffer and a topic will come up and you can say, oh, there's something really exciting on our campus happening on that topic. So if folks on your campus are open to being on your list, that's one very easy step. Okay, thank you everyone for starting the shift to Humanities Advocacy Day, which is what I want to focus on next. Humanities Advocacy Day is an event that we at the National Humanities Alliance organize every year in conjunction with the NHA annual meeting. It is coming up this year, March 19th to 21st. We would be delighted if everybody in the Zoom room joined us. And basically at the annual meeting portion of the event, we hold sessions on advocating for the humanities on campuses in your communities, and then get ready for advocating on Capitol Hill the following day. When we go to Capitol Hill, we break everyone into state-based delegations, and they go around to the congressional offices in their state to try to convince lawmakers to increase federal funding for the humanities, specifically for the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Archives, and Title VI and Fulbright-Hays. We have been very successful in the past and got the largest yearly appropriation ever last year, which is terrific. But that really does hinge on folks participating in Humanities Advocacy Day and telling their stories to lawmakers. We've been virtual the past 2 years, and we are looking forward to being in person for the first time this year, since 2020. So Kim and Susan have both participated in Humanities Advocacy Day. Kim, I'm going to turn to you first. Can you talk a little bit about the experience? What was your day like? What did you find valuable about it?
Sure, and we're going to wrap back around to some strategies later in the conversation. So I'll just talk about my experience. So I took over as the Humanities Forum director like a month before the first virtual Humanities Advocacy Day. So I was very new to both the direction of the forum, but also brand new to Humanities Advocacy, and it was virtual. So I've participated in the two virtual meetings. But there were a couple of things from that that I learned and that we'll talk about in terms of strategies that I adapted. But I will say that if you are considering it, that I didn't realize that it wouldn't be as scary as I had first thought that it might be. I knew it was something that the previous director had done, and so I should do it. But mostly who you're talking to is staff. Occasionally, at least from my arrangement, they will at least put you in with staff. And those staffers are, for me, I was struck at how very similar they are to my college students, right? Because a lot of them actually are college students from one of our universities that go immediately or over the summer. So it very much was an interaction like talking to my best students. And so that was a big discovery for me as well. And I also, my experience of it, and this sort of we'll go back to in the strategies, but I come from a state where there aren't a lot of people who are actively participating. And so the best that the organization could do was that they paired me, since I was brand new, with someone who was an advocate, who was an experienced advocate, but came from a state with a lot more representatives, to a lot more advocates. So she was someone who had advocated before from Maryland. She was fantastic, but I knew immediately because of the local context that I couldn't be like the second in this room, right? Like my representatives wanted to hear nothing from someone from the East Coast, love y'all, but nobody wanted to talk to an East Coaster. And so it made me step really quickly into those shoes and say, I know this state, I've lived here a really long time, I know these people, I know these local values, I have to take the lead here. And so stepping into that and adapting some strategies that I knew from other kinds of contexts, which we can come back to later. But those are sort of my experiences as doing it virtually. It was a great experience. It's a lot less intimidating than I thought it was going to be, but I did need to step up and do the research and prepare and be ready to take the lead.
I love those dual points because we always are trying to emphasize to people, you will not be alone. You will not be doing this alone. You'll have an experienced advocate with you. But at the same time, it is super duper important to have locals come and participate and talk to their lawmakers, right? I'm so glad you paired those 2 points. Susan, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I've done this a few times on Capitol Hill, and it's really fascinating, I must say, being in the offices of the state and federal legislators. I think we visited 7 or 8 offices each time, and the meetings vary depending on the number of advocates who were present. In the case of the meetings with staff members of Senators Feinstein and Kamala Harris, we had about 10 people from California. Everyone had like 1 minute to represent their institution. And it's very important for that reason. I mean, regardless, to be succinct and focused when you're talking about your projects. I've been in meetings with only one other person from California, from the California cohort. So then we were able to go in a bit more deeply into our work. And what was also important is that we could ask questions of the staff aide, for example, in terms of what the interest, the foci, the issues were that most compelled the official. As Kim said, you are meeting most likely with one early to mid-career aide to the representative, who's then going to be responsible, though, for filtering up the information that they receive. And this is really good. You can also encourage them to encourage the official to join humanities-related caucuses, for example. In my experience, these staffers are young and extremely well prepared, and they take careful notes. They're really good purveyors of information, and they're from California usually. So there's a nice loop, home loop. So I was taken aback at first as well, but was really impressed with the quality and the achievements of these young people, whom we often get to learn about too when we have time. Another thing that I found really interesting is that, or what it did for me is that, as I mentioned, it gave me a chance to really practice effectively and efficiently representing the federally funded work in the humanities on my campus, and also to learn from the other advocates what's going on in the state, because I think that's very interesting. And that's another topic. I think there's so much good work to be done by having statewide dialogues about issues and initiatives in the humanities. I'll also say that not only by speaking with the staff aide, but by looking around the physical space of the offices, I learned more about the areas of engagement of the Congress members. So it enabled me to know my audience. As Kimberly said, you have to do that. I mean, for example, when you go into Kevin McCarthy's office and Fox News is playing, you know, sort of, you learn something, you learn where the information's coming from and sort of what the atmosphere, what the vibe is in the room. So, you know, I think it's really that in situ experience is really very informative.
Thank you. Okay, Leanne and Aaron, you do days like this all the time. You're constantly engaging with members of Congress and their staff, and you're constantly bringing folks from campus to Capitol Hill to talk to members of Congress and their staff. Within this broader context, can you offer some insight about why advocacy days like these are important in the broader context of higher ed lobbying? Go ahead, Leanne, and then Aaron.
Yeah, I have two initial thoughts on that. I think one, yes, to your point, I was just looking at my calendar earlier today. Starting next week through April, I have someone here every single week for the next like 7 to 8 weeks in a row. So we really are, I mean, part of that is because the Capitol is open, people are back. Some offices have been doing it in person and virtual, etc. Anyway, so yes, I think that having this interaction on a specific day with all these folks across the state, again, I think as Susan was saying, it can really vary. And I know that Kim hit on this too. I've had years, so this will be like my 7th year doing this, I think, but I've had years where it's just the University of Iowa in our meetings, and I've had years where we've had up to 3 or 4 other institutions in with us too. And I think it conveys on that specific day and throughout the year, right? It's not just one day, but it's having all these people in on the same day that this is a university priority. So the fact that I'm in the room shows, because I interact with these people all the time, that this is a University of Iowa priority. So that's one thing why I think it matters. And then two, in the broader context, to your point, B, about higher education world and lobbying, we have not just the state of Iowa. I don't know the numbers. I'm not quite sure yet who's all going to be there, but someone, you know, from every state or almost every state going in to talk to members on the same day is really impactful when it comes to conversations around funding and those types of things. So it's elevating not just one state, but all. And so I think that's a really important note and why we do it. So, yeah.
And I would add that I use the Humanities Advocacy Day as like a foundation for my year-round conversations with staffers. A lot of these staffers are staffers who I may otherwise never have had interaction with, but would not for Humanities Advocacy Day, and or offices that my university has been trying to build relationships with. So being able to use National Humanities Day, Advocacy Day as a foot place or a foundation from which we can still have these conversations year round. We usually like to have our advocates prepare like one pagers and talk about the importance of federal funding for the humanities to the state of New Jersey or to their district or the member. And we use that whenever I contact members of Congress about maybe bills targeting like funding for the humanities, or like bills talking about like increasing funding for the humanities. Whenever we say we want, whenever we talk about our ask, whether it's in May or June or September, October, or whenever the budget is eventually going to be passed, we like to like bring up these examples of here are the same projects that we talked to you about in March, and these are the same projects that will continue to be funded with increased funding from Congress all year round. So I really like that aspect. And Susan also brought up a really great point about building awareness between advocates too. My greatest experience in the leading New Jersey teams was watching advocates really talk to one another and build off of one another's points during like the meetings, and really starting to learn how to like enhance the conversation, and later on actually building groups together outside of the meeting and talk more about like how do we do more advocacy for the state and for humanities. So it's a great experience both for the government relations offices in terms of like building relationships, as well as for humanities scholars who want to learn how to do more advocacy for themselves.
Great. Thank you. Some of you have already touched on this, what makes for successful advocacy on Capitol Hill, but I think that there are a few more ideas out there. Kim, can you start us off? What has worked for you in these Oklahoma offices?
Yeah, there's a couple of points here. Again, one of the things that I want to mention is that, especially for the smaller states with smaller delegations and with smaller state institutions or not as many state institutions, you might find yourself in the situation like I did, where you were speaking for not just the academic humanities center at a university is unique, not just in the university context, but also in the fact that you're positioned such as a leader for advocating for the humanities in the state broadly. Does that make sense? Like, I think of myself not only as just advocating for my university, but being someone who is in a tenured role and to have that platform to advocate for the humanities in the state more broadly. And so that's how I approached it. And you might find yourself in a similar context. So when I approached these, the research that I did ahead of time, I knew going in which offices I was going to be meeting with. I know, and I made sure to do the research ahead of time and learn about the senators and the representatives that I was going to be meeting with and what their priorities were, what they state their priorities are. And the NHA, when they know you're participating, they'll give you these like fact sheets of like, this is the basic information, and then you fill in with your local context, right? Like you have to know all of this, all the backstory. And I think that that for me, it's actually quite easy, because the only question that you're going in to answer when you're talking, especially to conservative lawmakers, is how do these federal dollars benefit people in the local context? How does this benefit everyday Oklahomans? It's how they would talk about it. It's the kind of questions that those staffers have to be able to explain. It's the kind of things that's how they talk about it, and that's how they think about it. So for me, that was literally the only thing that I was interested in pointing out, was in telling them stories about how those federal dollars benefited everyday Oklahomans. And the unique positioning of the university director is that not only are you coming from a university context where you're hopefully tenured and aren't going to get fired for saying humanities are good, but also you also are coming in with a local experience. And so and we'll talk a little bit about how do these skills transfer, but it's just like in university administration, talking to donors, talking to people across the spectrum, where you have to be able to translate these into tellable stories. Well, fantastic, we're in the humanities, we're good at telling stories. And so thinking about, and I'll just give you a quick example. So there was I used this awesome tool that they have, and B, do you want to put that up in the chat if they haven't seen it? So they, in the training ahead of time, they gave me this website, and so then I just spent hours on it, just looking at what federal dollars have come into Oklahoma, how were they spent. And they've got a really cool interactive map, and who doesn't love digital interactive story maps? And so I went through and looked for stories of who is using this money. So I'll give you a quick example. So some of the money had been used to fund a cultural district that was in a very small town in Oklahoma that was on the train line that goes through from Oklahoma City, Norman, down to Texas. And so it was, you get off the train and you go into this. And I had done that with my kids. I had gone on that train and I had gotten off at that stop. And I'd seen that little town, and I didn't know that federal dollars were coming in to foster this. And so I sat there and I chatted with every single person about this story, about me taking my kids on this Heartland Flyer train that everybody would have this like local connection to, right? Nobody else can do that because you don't have those local experiences, right? I did it with Fulbright as well. I had a good friend who grew up here, who went on Fulbright. She was from Oklahoma. She went to OBU. And then she went and did this Fulbright, and now she's doing advocacy for Uyghurs in DC. So like showing this like Oklahoma success story through the Fulbright program, right? It's a way to make those federal dollars make sense to them, because again, the only question you're answering is how do those federal dollars benefit me? The last thing I'll just say is that if you're coming from a conservative state context like I am, that you also have to adjust your expectations and goals for those meetings. For me, I know that I'm probably not going to shift any of my state or local senators and representatives to shifting their votes on things. But what I was hoping to do is to build long-term relationships with those offices. So at the very least, they wouldn't be standing on the floor speaking against investing in these programs, right? If they can see that these benefit veterans in Oklahoma, they benefit kids in Oklahoma, they benefit rural communities, not just, the elite urban communities, right? If they could see that all of these things benefit actual Oklahomans, then they have reasons why they might want to continue the conversation. So I think I'll stop there.
Well, I don't have a lot to add. That was great. Practically, and I don't know if you can see, we bring a large postcard. Can you see this? That we print up, in which we actually list the NEH grants and we have brief descriptions of some of the projects that we want to highlight. We choose the projects that most clearly, as Kim said, demonstrate the impact of the humanities and also that are of interest to broad audiences. So we're judicious in our selection. And again, just to echo what you heard, I also find it, and I think I mentioned this, very useful to know what committees and caucuses the Congress members are on, so you can identify the areas of humanities work that may be of particular interest to them. So, yeah.
Thank you, Susan and Kim. Leanne and Aaron, do you want to chime in with anything additional? I think you already gave great examples of what effective advocacy looks like. Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, not much more. The only thing I would flag is it's really helpful to know your funding sources. So the one thing that I found really illuminating is the NEH is incredibly important, but there are other federal funding streams too that fund the humanities. And so just like the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, the Fulbright program, the National Archives, like there's a couple different ones, and some of your institutes may receive that funding. So my kind of only advice is to have a quick, whether it's part of the one pager or just in the back of your mind. Philanthropy grants are good to know too, but for the specifics of these conversations, knowing which if any federal funding streams have supported your institution, and then what you've been able to do with those. I think Kimberly kind of laid this out really well. Again, a very rural state. Our folks really, staff members like to hear about rural impact. So if I can talk about a seed grant, partnerships with K-12, local communities, how we're getting out into the community and not just saying, and I know some of you may laugh, but in Johnson County, it's very urban, in Iowa City. So how we're getting out to the rural areas is important for our work too. So making those connections.
And Susan brought up a great point about like the importance of like one pagers. Namely, like what we had to do at Princeton is like make sure we set up a one pager that demonstrates the value of federal funding for humanities. I hope you're all seeing the same screen that I'm seeing. Never quite know with Zoom, but so we like to demonstrate the actual funding impact for the state of New Jersey. We also have include information about the National Endowment for the Arts and also recent projects done by previous advocates of the year. And the goal, again, is to just demonstrate this is the local actual visualized impact of the programs that the NEH actually funds. So that is always important. Now, also when it comes to members that may not be as enthusiastic about funding the humanities, what we like to do is talk about things that Congress itself has demonstrated strong supports for. And in its previous bills, in its report language, every year during appropriations, they include report language about the projects at the NEH they very much are enthusiastic about, such as in documenting endangered languages, things along those lines. But as mentioned previously as by Kimberly, is also really important to work to know the members that you're working with and the offices that you're engaging with. I like to speak with our State Council for the Humanities, the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. They do a lot of work with these offices as well, and they have great insight as to what areas of priorities these members most respond to, whether it is veterans, the veterans programs, or whether it is the combination of climate change science with the humanities or the preservation of ancient artifacts. It's always good to know which projects are in your state and in your community, and which ones are lining up most with the interests of your member.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I want to shift a little bit to in-district engagements with members of Congress. We would be delighted if everybody came to Washington, D.C. in March, but of course that's not always possible. And there are ways to engage with members of Congress and their staff in district. We're going to go through a few of them fairly quickly. I would also love to see any questions in the chat that people have, because we're going to start to pivot in that direction pretty soon. So very briefly, NHA will often work with members with state humanities councils or humanities centers or government relations officers to organize meetings in district that bring together humanities scholars, center directors, representatives from museums and libraries to connect directly with members of Congress or their district staff. We are always looking to do more of these events. So if that seems like something that would be appropriate for your context, please be in touch and we can talk about it. Leanne and Kim have both participated in events like this, one in Iowa and one in Oklahoma City. Leanne, do you want to just talk very briefly about the event we did in Iowa and how you see the impact of it?
Yeah, so I thought this was one of my favorite events I participated in. The Czech Museum in Cedar Rapids actually hosted us, and that was kind of a strategic decision to where we held it. So we worked in tandem with them and NHA to plan this event. We were lucky. I think we had a representative from each of our congressional offices. Their state staff came. That's something that my office does is we invite the district staff, so those staff who are based in state, to come to a lot of events on campus. And this was around the state, they do that. That's their job. And so we were able to get someone, I think, from every office, and we had breakout sessions and we dove into a lot of content and context. And it was a very unique opportunity because outside of a 15-minute meeting, this was, I don't recall how long, maybe half a day. But we had all these folks from different places, the museums, the libraries, the university, scholars from other universities at tables with staff. So they got a lot of interaction time. They got to ask a lot of questions. We had, I think Senator Grassley's staff was even the note taker for one of the tables and was giving a presentation on readouts, right? So a lot of engagement and interaction that you don't always get in, when we're out here in DC and trying to fit in a smaller amount of time. So I thought it was really productive both from the collaboration within the state, other institutions and other, funded agencies, and then also the congressional staff.
Thank you, Leanne. And Kim participated in one very recently in Oklahoma City that we organized in collaboration with the State Humanities Council there. And their executive director of the State Humanities Council, Carolyn Lowry, has a connection with all of the humanities centers in the state. And Kim, as the director of one of them, joined. Kim, do you want to just say a few words about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, that one, we didn't have as much turnout from local representatives or from offices, federal offices in the state. And that Often, I think, as B has mentioned, it's just sometimes the political context is just really tricky when you get local, and who's showing up for what. So from that perspective, it maybe wasn't as successful as the Iowa gathering, but we very rarely as a state have advocates for the humanities meeting together to build those kinds of local connections. And I think for me, that's sort of the takeaway of what was so valuable about that meeting, was not just the opportunity to meet with elected representatives, but to think of us as a state coalition and to encourage participation in things like the National Advocacy Day.
Thank you. And Kim, I know, I'm going to turn to Susan in a second. Kim, I know you have an idea for in-district engagement of your own, building off Humanities Advocacy Day. Can you share that? And then I want to kick it to Susan, who I know has done some good in-district engagement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the cool things that happens when you actually do get to sit down with a senator or a representative in DC or virtually for me. So in one of my meetings, I met with someone who was a state rep, now is going to be the incoming state senator, or is the state senator, I guess. And he had mentioned an interest that he had in this Christian, in Native Christian. He's Native, and so he was interested in these Native Christian hymns. And I was like, well, actually, we have this gathering every year at our Oklahoma Native Youth Language Fair. We have a Native hymn singing night. So, like, would you like to come at some point? And so so those are, I guess the only point of that is whatever the local thing is, you have all of this local knowledge about what is happening, not just at your campus, but on your state. And so when you're engaged in those conversations, you can think of those things in the moment and make those kinds of local connections, and always be trying to think about, how do I get them here to see the impact of these federal dollars in the state?
That is a great idea. I hope it happens. Susan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just mention one event that happened, or one thing. So I run a UC-wide, University of California-wide summer writing workshop for student veterans from all 10 campuses in the state. And this has been funded by the NEH. And at the conclusion of the workshop, we host a banquet in which the veterans give a public reading of their essays, of the work they produced. So it happens that our local representative, Salud Carbajal, is on the House Committee on Armed Services. He's also a veteran. So we invited him to the banquet, and he sent a staff person, and it was really a great opportunity for us to showcase the power of the humanities to help veterans build bridges to their communities, by sharing stories about their service. And I know it was very impactful. We had lots of follow-up. Always important to follow up all of these events, all of this advocacy, lots of reinforcement with emails. And yeah, it was just a big success, I think, for us, for everybody. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Aaron, do you mind taking us off spotlight so if people want to raise their hands, I can see. Leanne and Aaron, do you want to throw in any other last in-district ideas for engagement?
I know for Princeton, we're arranging one of our Senate offices. When Juneteenth became a federal holiday, we arranged to have one of our speakers on campus, give a talk to all of the district staff virtually via Zoom about the history of Juneteenth and the history of liberation of Black Americans. Very great turnout, very great engagement. Questions ran all the way to the end, and now that office now recognizes this is the importance of humanities and history, and they know that we are a resource when it comes to further humanities events. And we've also been approached by district staff who are working with diverse communities, Latin American communities, to give them more insight about how they're doing with constituent outreach, more insight about the history of these communities that they're working with. So there are always opportunities to help to build that relationship with members of Congress, and to help your government relations team come up with ideas of how to build those relationships as well.
Yeah, not sure anything else to add, just really, I guess this also kind of circles back to where we started, which is engaging with your government relations offices, because we invite district staff to events all the time. And we have found, at least our staff, specifically the district staff, love to come. They show up to probably 90% of the things I invite them to. And so it's a really good way, if you're hosting something either on campus or in conjunction with other partners across the state, just make sure they get an invite to come if it's in their, you know, in their district. I think there's a lot of interest out there, so.
Thank you. Okay, well, we have a question in the chat, and anybody else feel free to just raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Do you use social media as an advocacy and engagement tool for building local and federal relationships? Any strategies, preferred platforms such as LinkedIn and Twitter? I'm curious to hear from any of the panelists. Anybody want to jump in? Is that a no?
I will start and saying that is actually something we're trying to do more of. Social media is like a separate team from our main office, but we really want to like utilize it more often, especially as we're seeing like humanities advocacy and research getting more attention on the national level. So whenever we do highlight professors and scholars who get like NEH grants and awards, but more along the lines of, okay, President Biden announced, like, I think it was October as like National Humanities, Arts and Humanities Month. Like, what does this mean? Like, so we're hoping to use that more often to on our social media platforms.
I will say that on Humanities Advocacy Day, we do encourage active use of social media, taking selfies with congressional staff after the meeting, and then posting it with a thank you, which will often get a retweet. And it's nice to see that level of engagement at least, or thanking members of Congress on Twitter. I mean, thanking them, saying anything nice about them gets engagement. So we've had some success on this front.
We do all of that. We do that.
Did you want to add anything else, Susan?
Not about the use of social media,
okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Wendy, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This has been such a helpful panel. I'm an associate dean for humanities at the University of Delaware, and I will be attending Advocacy Day. I'm really looking forward to it. I have a kind of curious question. I also serve on the board of a major research library in Massachusetts, even though I live in Delaware, that has received NEH funding. I don't know if they've received state funding from a state agency. But in talking with the director of the library, you know, I asked, do they send anyone to Advocacy Day? And they do not. So I'm curious about what the protocols might be about advocating for an institution that is not in your home state, if that's even possible.
Great question. We do deal with this a decent amount. Either like folks are involved in an institution that's not in their state, or they have a project that crosses state borders or works with populations in another state. And we have in the past like figured out ways for a Delaware advocate to hook up with a Massachusetts group for particular meetings, especially where that institution is in district. So we'd be happy to talk about that more. Or try to get one of your colleagues from that institution to join us. That's another option. But yes, we can definitely work something like that out. Sherwin, do you want to hop off mute and share your question?
Yeah, I've done this with another group that I belong to. And one of the things that I found really valuable is to look and see if your senator offers a constituent coffee or a get-together at some point during your visit. Sherrod Brown, my state senator or U.S. senator, I've gone to a couple of his coffees, and I have had face-to-face time with him guaranteed. So it was like 8:30 to 9:30. You just sign up on the website. I've got a brand new senator, and I'm going to look and make sure, find out if he's going to have any kind of get-together, et cetera, because you know, there's somebody, one of his aides was standing beside him with a notebook, wrote your name down, and I got a personal note back, all of that. So that's a really good, easy, you know, no pain way to try to get some face time with your senators. Thanks.
Thank you. And I will say that when we reach out to schedule meetings for Humanities Advocacy Day, we often hear back, like, here's your meeting time. We're also hosting one of these coffees. And so it's often an option on the table in association with Humanities Advocacy Day if people are in town at that point. Okay, I welcome more questions. I also have some final reflection questions for our panelists and an opportunity to say a few final things, anything that's come to mind for them. For our Humanities Center folks, Kim and Susan, Has the experience of advocating on the Hill or in district changed your sense of your role within the university? Or are there any lessons that you apply from this advocacy to your broader advocacy for the humanities? I will, I think, tap. I was hoping somebody would unmute first, but nobody has. Susan, I'm going to tap you to go first, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the experience has made me more committed than ever to demonstrating and to discussing with faculty and students and administrators how and why the humanities are both a social good and a public good. And I think I've become more aware of the importance of emphasizing this question of value when I'm speaking with faculty who are seeking funding so that they can build this awareness into their funding proposals. So I think that's one sort of concrete consequence. The experience of advocating has also made me very aware of the importance of being able to talk about the humanities to non-specialists in ways that invite people in and that demonstrate really the integral place of humanities in our society, you know, really making them feel it and see it and recognize it.
Yeah, and I'll just amplify everything that Susan just said is exactly some things that I would say as well. It really does help you, especially in applying for NEH funding, those proposals, they really like to see that you draw that connection, right? Like, how does this benefit regular people in the US? And so having that is helpful in helping guide faculty on those applications. But I think it's also, as I said, being an advocate on Capitol Hill was one of the first things that I did as director of the Humanities Center. So it's sort of, for me, it was part of my sort of training for communicating with broader audiences. And that storyfying things, the ability to take that fact of the funding and turn it into a compelling story. I think that is a really effective tool, not just when you're talking to senators, but also when you're talking to upper administration, when you're talking to donors, when you're talking to other kinds of university publics. It's really good to practice that skill and to have evidence, to have done the research, and be able to do that. So those are some things that I brought away from it.
Thank you. It's great to hear. And a similar question for Leanne and Aaron, and I recognize as I ask this question that you are both seasoned lobbyists, advocates, and that you both have a good amount of experience working on the Hill as well. But I'll ask anyway. Has engagement in humanities advocacy activities we've discussed today changed the way you think about what's happening on your campus, or changed the way you think about your work more generally? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I think for me, the engagement piece for Humanities Advocacy Day is really a tool for me to connect with my folks on campus. And so I think it helps not just from like our perspective of advocating for the humanities to Congress, but to find how we want to, and again, I guess this is also building on what Kim just said, how we want to tell our story as a university, as a humanities campus, as a writing campus, you know, all these things that are woven into the fabric of who we are as like Hawkeyes, and then how we tell that story with the funding that we receive and have spread across the state. So I think it's just it's a flashpoint in kind of helping us have an opportunity to have that conversation.
And I definitely want to echo the importance of like advocating for the humanities has given to me in terms of like connecting more of my campus as well. I started like a week before the pandemic like shut everything down, Princeton. So I was unable to like actually interact a lot with campus. But once events started kicking up again this past year, I started like really understanding like the value of like going to campus and actually being a part of the events and seeing what these events are contributing to like the community. So it's great to see the actual impact of it. But as all advocacy for humanities has also taught me, generally speaking, how to be more creative with my advocacy. Like, how do we find like better ways to explain like the importance of the humanities? How do we like help defeat misconceptions about the value or the undervaluing of the humanities? And it's really given me like a great challenge to like learn and like how to adjust to like messaging that changes and like makes it optimal. So I've enjoyed it, and I enjoyed like learning how to be creative through my advocacy with the humanities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to our panelists today for your time and your insight and your ongoing robust advocacy for this cause. We really deeply appreciate having people to work with who are this skilled and thoughtful and dedicated. So thank you so much for all of that. We look forward to seeing you in March. We hope others will consider joining us, and also open to talking about possibilities to collaborate in district as well. We hope to see you at the next sessions as we continue forth in the CHCI NHA series on advocacy. And with that, I will say have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.